Well, good morning, Breakfast at 9. And as you can see, I'm standing on the beach at Lake Galilee. The great thing about coming to Israel is you see the Bible come to life before your very eyes. If you come to this place, you never read the Bible the same way again. Actually, we're just having lunch at a restaurant, as you can see, and the thing they serve here is something they call St. Peter's fish. I think it's a kind of carp. It's very delicious, and they still do fish in the lake, and you can pick up and have fantastic fish meals here. Well, 2,000 years ago, Jesus did something very much like this. You know, he sat down on the beach and he prepared breakfast for his disciples. And they were out fishing, and when they came in, he gave them breakfast. So we're kind of recreating in an amazing way the experience the first disciples had. Now we're looking at communion. We've been looking at communion, and every few weeks at Breakfast at 9. And the first time we did this, we looked at communion as a symbol and how powerful symbols are. And then next, Margaret looked at what communion symbolized, and how communion symbolizes a new covenant, a new relationship with God. And then we looked at how communion symbolizes an intimate commitment between Jesus and us. By eating the bread and wine, it's like we're kind of taking in almost his body and blood. Jesus' ultimate commitment to us is symbolized by us committing ourselves to him by taking in this bread and wine. This week I want to look at another aspect of communion, which is that it's a meal. It's a meal. It's a covenant meal. So how's this for a story? Peter and the other disciples completely deserted Jesus at his moment of need. There he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. They promised to stick by him thick and thin, but actually what happened was at the key moment they scarpered. Of course, Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead, and they suddenly realized that of course he was stronger than death and victorious over death. And so he began to restore them, and they came closer to him again. But the thing was, some of them were still feeling full of guilt. You know, Peter in particular was feeling full of guilt. What happened was, he said, "I'll never deny you." But what happened was 3 times when questioned, he denied that he knew Jesus. A terrible thing. Now, how do you come back from that? How can you be reconciled in that way? How can Jesus pull Peter back to walking the path that he'd always planned for him? He did a really smart thing. After Jesus' resurrection, the other disciples were kind of getting things sorted out with Jesus, but I think Peter really thought that he still had nothing left to give. And what happened was that Peter came back to Galilee, and he just said, it's in John 21, he said, "I'm going fishing." You know, he just thought, well, I'll go back to my old life. My old life as a fisherman. There's nothing left for me in Jesus' plans. He can't possibly use me. I'm going fishing. The others decide to join in with him, and so they go fishing too, and they fish all night and they catch nothing. Not a minnow, not a sprat, nothing. And they come back towards the beach, probably very like this, it could even be this beach. And what happens is, there's a man on the beach, and they don't recognize him immediately, but suddenly the man shouts, he says, "Look, throw your nets on the other side of the boat." It's a really odd thing to say, you know, because why would you do that? Why would it be better to fish from one side than the other? Surely the fish are all around the boat, or in this case they weren't there at all. But they decide to give it a go. They throw the nets in, and then they haul in a massive catch of fish, 153 of these fish that we're eating for lunch today. And suddenly the penny drops, and Peter says, "It's the Lord." And he jumps into the water and he rushes onto the beach. And there's Jesus. And Jesus has actually made breakfast. He's made breakfast for them. Now, you know, in the Middle East, in Israel and in Middle Eastern society, you don't sit down for a meal with somebody unless you're reconciled. So what Jesus was saying by making breakfast for them and sitting down and eating with all the disciples, and especially Peter, was, look, it's all right. I've forgiven you. Things are okay. You're reconciled with me, and I'm reconciled with you. That's what communion is. It's a meal. It's a covenant meal, but it's a meal of reconciliation. When we eat the bread and we drink the wine, we're taking in and we're acknowledging Jesus' death for us and that we're reconciled to Jesus and reconciled to God the Father through Jesus, which is an amazing thing. And I'll tell you what happens after that story, actually. They have breakfast, and then Jesus draws Peter aside, and he just says to him, "Do you love me more than these?" And I think what he was saying, he wasn't saying, "Do you love me more than these other disciples?" He's saying, "Do you love me more than all this fishing stuff that you were going to return to?" And Peter says, "Lord, you know I love you." And Jesus says, "Well, feed my sheep then. I chose you to go and be a pastor, to go and be the rock, the foundation of my church. That's what I want you to do. It's okay. It's reconciled." Now, when we eat bread and when we drink wine in communion, we are focusing and remembering that reconciliation. In Paul's letter to Corinthians chapter 5, Paul says this: God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, and he's given us a ministry of reconciliation. So God was in Christ, he reconciled, we got reconciled with God, okay, and now we've got to go out and bring people to Christ and reconcile others to him as well. Can you see? Which is an amazing thing. So look, it's a meal. When we're going to drink the wine in a minute, we're going to eat the bread, and we're going to remember that meals in the Middle East are not casual. They're experiences of reconciliation. So let's eat and drink thankfully that we are reconciled to God through Jesus. Amen.